So I just introduced you. Thank you very much for letting me know. So we just talked about the external employer brand, which is basically insiders, employees' perception of the employer brand in comparison to the internal employer brand, which is basically those. So this is outsiders, externals, outsiders, and internal is employees, insiders' perception of the employer brand. This is a theoretical differentiation because, of course, it's different people whose perceptions is influenced and whose perception is looked at. But then on the other hand, it's really dangerous for organizations if the external and the internal employer brand are not fitting and if these perceptions differentiate. Because imagine what happens. As long as you're an applicant, you're an outsider. So you have the outsider's perspective of the employer brand. You apply for this organization for the reason and for the image that you have about the organization. You're selected, you're happy to be there, and you start working there. Now imagine that you start to work and you realize what you find internally as the employer brand is not fitting with what you were expecting from an external point of view. This would be, in the best case, what you find inside is better than what you expected. But very often what happens is that you enter and you realize the promises that you received and the idea that you had about the organization is actually something very different. And so most of the time, this can lead to disappointment if the internal employer brand is not in line with the external employer brand. In research, we talk about a psychological contract that is then heard. So you establish as an organization, you establish the psychological contract with employees during the recruiting phase. A psychological contract is basically everything that you kind of understand as an employee that you have to deliver, and on the other hand, that the organization will give you. So for example, in the consultancy, there's clearly another psychological contract that you have than in other organizations, because you know you will be traveling a lot, you also know you will be working a lot, and you will really be expected to go the extra mile. But then on the other hand, your expectation is also a little bit different, because even though you wouldn't assume necessarily or understand that you will be there for your whole life, you will have the expectation that you will get interesting work, interesting cases, that actually you will fly around a lot, that you will see the world, that you will make important experiences, and then also that afterwards you most probably end up in a job that is also very good. So that is a very specific psychological contract. Imagine you have the psychological contract, you enter an organization and you don't find it. And that's a problem. And therefore, the internal and the external employer brand actually needs to be in line in transmitting why a firm is different and why desirable as an employer. And in which dimensions firms are different and organizations are different, that is the content of the employer brand. So when we go on the content, we talk about instrumental attributes and symbolic attributes. And the instrumental attributes are those that are traditionally considered as the part that is important for attracting employees. So let's look into the different dimensions. The definition is, it's directly job related. It's in some terms of objective, it's physical, it's the tangible attributes. So they have a certain utility, they maximize the benefits and they minimize the costs. Being a little bit more specific, one important dimension is pay. So the level, the amount of pay that you give, in which form you receive your pay, is it fixed pay? Is it variable pay, for example? Are you paid on a team level? Are you paid on the individual level? All these are different dimensions in which pay can be more or less attractive for you. Also, one important dimension is advancement, so the possibilities for promotion within the organization. And even though a lot of people don't answer directly the question about where do you want to be in 5 years with I want to be a leader, nevertheless, of course, it's important that you have advancement, that you can develop, and may it be in the hierarchical dimension in terms of getting into leadership positions, or also maybe on the same level in terms of getting different tasks, getting different, being able to develop different competencies. All this are part of the package. Job security, so how high is the security of further employment? Again, this can be very different depending on the organization. The task demands, so which responsibility will you have in terms of what kind of workload will you face? Also in terms of urgency, so what time pressure do you expect or will you expect in your future position? The location is a very important question. So closeness, attractiveness. Think about all the startups that are mostly in big cities, because this is a very important part for them to be attractive for applicants. On the other hand, especially small and medium-sized organizations are very often located in remote places, which is very helpful for your taxes, but which makes it very difficult to attract, especially young talents coming directly from the university, because most people have a preference for huge cities or large cities that are attractive and that give you some cultural surrounding. So location is definitely also a very important part of the package. Working with customers, also depending on the preferences. Benefits, so additional benefits beyond pay, and there we see currently in organizations that they are very much extending the package. So traditionally, the benefits very often circled about things that were related to status. So for example, the company car, the parking space. Many organizations, as crazy as it is, for example, have the size of the offices as additional benefits. But here we also talk about health benefits, about further retirement plans for employees. We also talk about things like if food is prepared for employees, also, for example, fitness facilitates or facilitations, if you can do sports at your workplace. And then also talking about flexible working hours. Also, do I have the opportunity to decide about the time and the space where and when I want to work? So these characteristics are those that are directly influencing your daily work life and that are directly related to your job. In comparison, we have the symbolic job attributes. There we have the non-job related attributes in terms of subjective and intangible attributes. So these are more about self-identity and self-expression in terms of an organization having traits, characteristics that are really attractive for you and that you also value. And in the first examinations, there were 5 different characteristics detected. So the first one is sincerity. So if you perceive an organization as honest and as sincere. Innovativeness, in terms of being daring, trendy, cool, spirited, excited, young. So this can also be one dimension. We have competence in terms of how secure, how intelligent, how reliable you perceive the organization to be. We have prestige in terms of upper class, prestigious. It gives you a certain status. So the organization is related and is perceived as having a certain status. And then we also have robustness in terms of the organization being really strong, very robust, and really related to strength. As I emphasized at the beginning, this is really the first set of characteristics. I personally think there are some missing, some dimensions. We will also talk a little bit more about which dimensions might be missing here. It's the first quantitative examination that is taking place, but really the question about the dimensionality is something that is currently under research and that is currently further figured out. So this is the very first set of symbolic job attributes.